I recently made a video on what switch films are and why you should use them on some switches. But something I didn't cover in that video was the differences between the various switch film options out there. This list recently grew with the introduction of Desky's switch films, so I thought this would be the perfect time to make a video comparing all of them. In this video, we're going to be comparing TX films, Kibo films, Thicc films, and Desky's films. I'll be comparing the sound and feel of each films on Alpaca switches, which are known to benefit from films. I want to make sure the test is as accurate as possible, so I'm going to place each of the films on the exact same switch in the exact same position of the board to remove any external variables. But before we get into the sound test, let's talk a little bit more about each of these films. TX films. These seem to be the most popular choice at the moment, and they're usually out of stock. They're made of polycarbonate, they're about 5 cents per film, and based on my measurements using a micrometer, they're about 0.14 millimeters thick. Kibo films. These are a fairly popular alternative to TX films for switches that have a tighter housing because Kibo films are a little thinner. They're also usually in stock, so you can get your hands on some fairly easily. Like TX films, Kibo films are made of polycarbonate. They're also about 5 cents per film, and based on my measurements using a micrometer, they're about 0.12 millimeters thick. Thicc films. These are a relatively new type of film, which are an even thicker alternative to TX films at 0.3 millimeter thickness, although you can usually get something thinner upon request. They're also perpetually in stock through a Google form by a community member that will print these for you. And if you go the route of buying through the Google form, these are going to cost you about 6 cents per film. Desky's films. These are the newest addition to the bunch, and like Thicc films, they're also 0.3 millimeters thick. But unlike any of the other offerings, they're made of rubber. I couldn't find the exact rubber, but I did find that they're made out of a special kind of liquid injection silicone rubber. These are very interesting because they allegedly improve the sound through vibration reduction, which is the same logic behind adding foam and rubber to your keyboard case to change the sound profile of the build. It'll be interesting to see if the same logic actually makes a difference when applied to switches. Also worth mentioning, Desky's is no stranger to switch modification. They currently produce silencing rings for Topper boards. We'll start by listening to the unfilmed Alpacas, then we'll listen to each type of film back to back. Alright, let's do this. First off, I think we can all agree that the unfilmed Alpacas sounded pretty bad compared to any of the filmed ones. Although to be fair, I think this was at least partially due to the fact that I've opened these switches up a few times, so the housing wobble is pretty bad to begin with. One of the key takeaways from today is that adding films to switches that have a wobbly housing is really going to improve the sound by getting rid of that crunchy sound that the unfilmed wobbly houses have. Before we talk about sound, I want to talk a little bit about how easy or difficult it was to install each of these. The easiest to install were definitely the TX films. They were just hard enough so that they didn't bend easily, which made them really easy to place on the housing. The hardest to install were definitely the Thicc films, which were so thick that I had trouble closing some of the housings. Desky's were difficult at first because they were so bendy, but I got used to it pretty quickly. I uploaded the audio files to kbcompare.com, which is a website I created a few weeks ago to help with sound tests like this. The site will create a blind sound test for you so that you can listen to the uncompressed recordings at your own pace and make up your own mind about which switch films sound best to you. I'll leave a link to this sound test in the description below. Before I tell you about my preference, I really want to stress that I honestly think this is going to come down to personal preference. In fact, when I ended up sharing this test with 3 of my friends, we all ended up choosing a different one that we thought sounded the best. I took the test 5 times at different parts of the audio, and these were the results. For the first run, Thicc films were my favorite. For the second run, Desky's films were my favorite. For the third, Desky's. For the fourth, Thicc. And for the fifth, Desky's. So for this specific build and switches, Desky's were my favorite. But I can definitely see myself using the different films in different builds depending on the sound that I'm trying to achieve. I'll leave a link to the test in the description below, so I'd love to hear which one you thought was your favorite. And that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!